Night falls over the domes of Istanbul, and the streets fall silent under the weight of centuries. Beneath the shining lights of the Blue Mosque and Hagia Sophia, something ancient breathes through the stones. A whisper rises from the cracks of the city, as if the ground remembers what the world has chosen to forget. The air grows cold near the old cistern walls, and if one listens long enough, they can hear the faint clank of chains, carried by the wind that escapes from beneath the earth. The story begins here under the city where the Sultan once ruled, with glory above and darkness below. The dungeon was never marked on any map nor written in any record. Only those who entered its halls knew it existed, and none of them ever returned to tell. The stones that built it were said to have been carved in silence by men who were later buried inside them. For centuries, people have walked across Sultan Ahmet Square, never knowing what lies under their feet. Tourists take pictures of the mosques and palaces above, while the true secret of the empire sleeps below. Every ruler builds monuments for his pride, but the Sultan built one for his fear. The dungeon was not made to hold enemies, it was made to hide truths that could destroy thrones. Even now, the old guards who served in Topkapi whisper about tunnels that run under the palace, connecting to a dark chamber, sealed by heavy stone doors. They say when the wind blows from the Bosphorus, it carries the scent of damp iron and forgotten blood. No one dares to dig near that place, for the city is sacred and the past is cursed. The whisper beneath Istanbul is not only a sound, it is a memory calling out to anyone brave enough to listen. And tonight we descend into that memory. The people of old Istanbul feared the ground more than the sky. Fishermen spoke of a hollow beneath the palace where water and screams mixed together. Sometimes at night, the surface of the cistern rippled without reason, as if something below it was moving. Mothers told their children not to play near the old wells, for the sound of chains echoed from within. These were not tales meant to scare, they were fragments of truth scattered through time. The dungeon existed not as a rumor, but as a shadow that fed on silence. It was built during the reign of a sultan who trusted no one. Not his guards, not his viziers, not even his sons. He believed betrayal was born in the light, so he buried it in the dark. Under the marble floors of Topkapi Palace, a small chamber was carved through rock, leading to endless corridors. The walls were narrow and wet, the air heavy with the taste of metal. The deeper one went, the more the light vanished, until only darkness ruled. There was no record of its builders, for their names were erased. Some say they were slaves, others say they were architects who knew too much. When the first prisoner was taken there, the guards returned with pale faces. They spoke of a place where sound bends and time feels slower. The Sultan smiled and ordered them never to speak of it again. From that day, the dungeon became the empire's most guarded secret. It was the mouth of the city that swallowed men whole. The echoes of chains still haunt the night when the wind moves through the ancient stones. Istanbul sleeps, but the dungeon never does. Centuries later, during the Ottoman decline, a group of workers repairing the old palace baths discovered a strange hollow beneath the marble floor. When they lifted the slab, a rush of cold air struck their faces, carrying a smell of rot and iron. A narrow stairway spiraled down into the dark. No torch could fully pierce it, and yet a strange warmth pulsed from below, as if the earth itself was alive. They told the overseer, who ordered the hole sealed at once. But one of the workers slipped through at night, driven by curiosity. He tied a rope around his waist and descended step by step, counting his breaths. The air grew thicker until it pressed against his skin. He reached a small landing where the walls were smooth, unlike any Ottoman design. Strange marks covered the stone, symbols no one had seen before. As he moved further down, he found an archway half buried in rubble. Through it came a low moan, not of wind, but of something living. He dropped his torch and ran back up, screaming that he had seen faces in the dark walls. The next day, the opening was filled with stones and plaster, and the records of the bath's repair ended abruptly. Years later, the rumor spread among the palace staff that the dungeon beneath had been found again and sealed for the last time. No one knew what became of the worker who went below. Some said he left the city, others said he never truly came back at all. The hidden entrance still lies somewhere beneath the Sultan's shadow, waiting for the next crack in the earth to uncover it. Beneath the beauty of Istanbul there is a wound that never healed. The empire was at its peak, yet the Sultan slept little. Whispers of betrayal circled through the marble halls like smoke. Ministers plotted in silence, generals grew restless, and poets spoke too freely. The Sultan believed that power could only survive if fear lived beside it. So he ordered the creation of a place where silence would keep secrets forever. He called for the royal architect who had built the domes of his mosques and the fountains of his gardens. The Sultan gave him no design, only a command. Build a place that listens but never speaks. Build it beneath the ground where light cannot follow. The architect bowed and said nothing. He understood that this would be his last work. Beneath the palace gardens they dug through layers of soil and stone until they reached the bedrock of the city. There they carved tunnels shaped not for beauty but for obedience. The walls were curved to carry sound away so that screams would die before they could reach the surface. Each corridor turned upon itself, forming a maze that confused even the guards who patrolled it. When the work was done, the Sultan descended alone. He walked through the darkness, touching the walls as if feeling the pulse of his own creation. The air was thick and alive, the silence heavy and full. He whispered a prayer to his God and left without looking back. That night he ordered the architect to be buried within the last chamber, so that no one else would know the design. Thus the dungeon was born, not from hatred, but from fear. A fear that even kings cannot escape. Above the city the call to prayer echoed, while, below the ground, the first breath of the dungeon began. The first man to see the dungeon walls was not a thief or a murderer, but a vizier once trusted by the Sultan himself. He had served for 20 years, guiding the empire through wars and famine, yet in the court of power loyalty fades faster than friendship. Rumors spread that he had spoken against the Sultan in secret, and so he was taken from his home before dawn. He was led blindfolded through corridors he could not recognize. When the cloth was removed, he found himself in a chamber lit only by an oil lamp that burned too slowly to give warmth. The air smelled of wet stone. The guards spoke no word as they chained him to the wall and left. He called out to them, but his voice came back distorted, as if the walls themselves were answering. Days passed, or perhaps weeks, he could not tell. The dungeon played with his mind, bending time into circles. Water dripped from somewhere above in perfect rhythm, like a clock counting the moments of his sanity. Sometimes he heard footsteps, but when he called out, there was only silence. He began to speak to the walls, telling them of his life, of the Sultan of the empire. The walls listened but gave nothing back. When the guards returned, they found the vizier sitting quietly, eyes open but mind gone. He had written strange symbols on the ground with a piece of broken chain. No one could understand their meaning. The Sultan ordered that the chamber be sealed with him inside, for he had seen what no one should. Thus the first prisoner became the first ghost of the dungeon, and his whispers became part of its breath. Every stone carried a memory of his fear, and the dungeon began to remember. Deep in the heart of the dungeon lies a room that was never meant to hold anyone, yet its walls tell another story. It is called the Chamber of Silence because no sound escapes it, not even the echo of footsteps. The walls are smooth and cold, carved from black rock that drinks light. Those who entered said that even their heartbeat faded, as if the air itself refused to move. The chamber was used for those who defied the Sultan in spirit rather than action. Priests, scholars, poets, men whose voices carried more power than swords. They were taken there at night, their names erased from records. The guards were told not to speak their names even in memory. Inside the chamber there were no chains, for silence was punishment enough. One scholar who entered it left behind a single note scratched into stone with his fingernail. It read simply, "The mind screams louder than the mouth." No one knows how long he survived. It is said that the Chamber of Silence still exists beneath Istanbul, sealed under layers of earth and concrete. When tremors shake the city, sometimes a faint hollow sound rises, as if the dungeon still breathes. The silence it holds is older than the empire, older than fear itself. It waits patiently for the next name that history will forget. Above it, the world moves with noise and light, but below it, the air stays still heavy with the weight of voices that once tried to speak truth. In the chamber of silence, the past never dies, it only waits to be heard again. Night in the dungeon has no beginning and no end. The torches burn low and the air feels like wet cloth pressing against the skin. In that darkness, sound becomes alive. Every drip of water, every creak of iron turns into a voice. The prisoners who lived here said the dungeon could hear them and that it remembered their pain. When a man screamed, his cry did not fade. It traveled through the tunnels, echoing again and again until it became part of the stone. New prisoners could still hear it. A long, faint wail that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. Some said it was the dungeon feeding itself because it could not live without suffering. One soldier who guarded the lowest gate confessed that he once heard his own name whispered back at him from the walls. He swore no living person had spoken. He left the post that night and vanished from the city. The Sultan ordered silence and no one mentioned him again. Many years later, travelers who visited the ruins at night claimed to hear the same whispering voices beneath their feet. They said the sound rose through the ground like breath through the cracks of a tomb. The city built streets over the dungeon, but the voices stayed. Even now, when the wind blows across the old quarter, the sound of faint cries can be heard beneath the hum of traffic. Some say it is just the earth shifting, others know better. The dungeon may be buried, but its screams still rise to remind the world that memory never truly dies. The man who built the dungeon never meant to create evil. He was an artist of stone, a servant of the empire. Yet when the Sultan ordered him to seal the final chamber, he understood what he had done. Beneath his hands, the dungeon was alive. It breathed, it listened, it waited. He begged the Sultan to destroy it. The Sultan smiled and told him that silence was the price of creation. The architect was locked inside the last cell so that no other man could copy his design. For days he heard the sound of his own heartbeat and nothing else. He prayed for forgiveness, but no answer came. In the final hour, he pressed his hand against the wall and said, "May this place remember what it has taken." When his body was found, the wall where he had touched had changed. The stone was marked with the shape of a palm, as if burned into it from within. The guards covered it with plaster, but every few years the mark returned. It glowed faintly in torchlight like a wound that refused to heal. Legends say that whoever touches that mark hears a voice in their mind, not of anger, but of warning. Leave before the walls learn your name. Some laughed and tried it and never returned. Even centuries later, when the tunnels were rediscovered, engineers spoke of strange accidents. Tools vanished, lights flickered, shadows moved without cause. One man said he heard the sound of chiseling, though no one was there. The curse of the architect was not revenge, it was remembrance. The dungeon had learned to protect itself. In the silence beneath the city, the mark of the architect still waits unseen yet never gone. His creation became his tomb, and his tomb became the heartbeat of Istanbul's forgotten darkness. Power demands a price, and even the Sultan could not escape it. As the dungeon grew deeper, his dreams began to change. He saw corridors made of blood, voices whispering his name from the earth below. Each morning he awoke drenched in sweat, his pulse racing, his eyes wild. He ordered more guards, more locks, more prayers, but nothing silenced the sounds that only he could hear. The court physicians said it was exhaustion. The holy men said it was punishment. The Sultan said nothing, but each night he felt the dungeon pulling at him. It called like a child calling for its father. In his dreams he walked the tunnels and saw the faces of the men he had buried. They watched him with calm, empty eyes, as if waiting for something he did not understand. One night he rose from bed and walked barefoot through the palace until he reached the hidden door. The guards tried to stop him, but he waved them aside. They followed him down the spiral stairs into the dark. He carried no torch, yet he seemed to see without light. When he reached the deepest cell, he stopped. He whispered something none could hear. Then he turned and left without a word. The next morning he ordered the entrance sealed forever. But the nightmares did not stop. He heard the dungeon even from his throne, its breath rising through the stones, its heartbeat matching his own. When he died years later, The court found the same mark of a hand burned into the wall behind his bed. No one could explain it. The priest said the dungeon had claimed its maker and its master both. In the heart of Istanbul, where empires rise and fall, the dungeon still sleeps, but sometimes when the night is too quiet, the Sultan's whisper can still be felt in the air. It is the sound of regret that no prayer can wash away. There came a man whose name was erased before he even entered the dungeon. The guards called him the Nameless One because no record spoke of his birth or crime. He was brought at night under a veil of rain and silence. His eyes were calm, as if he already knew this place had been waiting for him. He was placed in a narrow cell where even sound refused to stay. For days he did not move or speak. The guards watched from the cracks and whispered that the air around him seemed heavier than the rest. When they left food at the door, it was untouched. Only the water disappeared. One night a guard swore he saw a faint light shining from within the cell like a breath of moonlight on water. When he entered, the light vanished, and the prisoner was gone. The chains were still locked, yet the cell was empty. The Sultan ordered the cell sealed, but every morning new words appeared on the wall, carved deep as if by invisible hands. They said, "I was never your prisoner, you were mine." The writing grew darker until it turned into shapes no one could read. The guards who stayed near that chamber went mad one by one. Some claimed to see a shadow sitting in the corner staring at them. The dungeon had taken his name, but not his will. He had become part of its mind, and through him, the silence learned to think. At the farthest end of the dungeon there was a passage that few dared to enter. It was called the Gate of Bones because the walls were built from remains, not stone. Skulls and ribs pressed together with mortar of ash. The air there was dry and cold, and it carried the faint taste of dust that had once been human. This gate was said to lead to the heart of the earth, a place where the dungeon touched the roots of the city. The guards believed that passing through it meant losing a piece of the soul. Those who went inside came back, changed, quiet, and hollow-eyed. Once a priest demanded to see it, saying he wished to bless the place. The guards obeyed, though their hands trembled. The priest entered with a candle and his voice echoing a prayer. Hours passed, but he did not return. When they went in to search, only his candle was found still burning, though the wax was gone. The Gate of Bones remains hidden now beneath the foundations of the modern city. But sometimes workers digging too deep find fragments of white stone shaped like ribs. They say the dungeon still guards its doorway, and that beneath Istanbul the bones still whisper to the living. In one chamber, the architect built a pool no larger than a man's body filled from an underground spring. It was called the Mirror of Water. Prisoners were brought there to face their reflections before judgment. The water was so clear it seemed not to exist, yet when they looked into it, they saw not themselves but what they feared most. Some saw fire, others saw the faces of those they had betrayed. One man looked and screamed that the water showed him the Sultan himself standing behind him. When the guards rushed in, the pool was empty, but his reflection stayed trapped within it. Over the years, the mirror became a forbidden place. Those who gazed into it too long vanished within days, as if the dungeon had taken their image and replaced it with shadow. Even today, beneath the old city, there are tales of a flooded corridor where still water lies untouched by time. Travelers who pass through say they see shapes moving beneath the surface. The water waits patient and silent, holding the reflections of everyone who has ever feared the truth. When the dungeon grew old and the empire began to fade, the guards noticed strange music beneath the earth. It was soft and distant, like wind moving through broken flutes. Some said it was the breath of the dead escaping through the cracks. Others said it was the souls of prisoners singing to remember who they were. At night the melody drifted through the tunnels, changing with every echo. Sometimes it sounded like prayer, sometimes like weeping. The guards tried to find its source, but the deeper they went, the more it moved away. One guard followed it for 3 nights and was never seen again. The Sultan ordered the passages sealed, yet the sound remained. Scholars who visited centuries later heard it too faint and steady as if coming from under the floor. They called it the Song of the Dead, a voice that could not stop speaking. Even now the people of Istanbul say that when the wind blows from the Bosphorus at midnight, it carries that same tune through the streets. A reminder that the dungeon still dreams, and that the dead still sing for those who listen. Among the prisoners was one man who wrote. His task had been to record royal decrees, but one day he began to write the truth instead of lies. For that, he was taken below. His cell was narrow and dark, yet he continued his work carving words into stone with the edge of a spoon. He wrote not for the Sultan, but for time, lines about the cruelty of men and the mercy of silence. When he died, his bones were buried in sand, but his walls remained. Centuries later, explorers found them and saw that his writing glowed faintly like veins of gold. The scribe had written the story of the dungeon before it was forgotten. Each word pulsed with life as if the stone still remembered his hand. They tried to copy the writing, but every photograph came out blurred. It was as if the dungeon refused to let its truth leave its walls. The hidden scribe was the first man to defeat silence by teaching it how to speak. One year the rains fell without end. Water seeped through cracks and filled the lower chambers. The guards fled, leaving the prisoners behind. The dungeon began to drown in its own silence. Voices turned to bubbles and footsteps to ripples. When the storm ended, the city above was safe, but the tunnels below were gone. Only the upper passages remained dry. The Sultan declared the dungeon closed and forbidden. He said the flood was a sign from heaven to bury the past. But at night, fishermen on the Bosphorus said they saw light beneath the water, glowing faint and steady. They said they heard voices, rising like the sound of waves, whispering words that could not be understood. The flood of silence washed away the bodies, but not the memory. The dungeon had swallowed itself, becoming both tomb and sea. Beneath Istanbul it still waits, breathing through the water, dreaming of the empire that once feared its own reflection. Centuries passed until one man returned to find what the earth had hidden. He was a historian chasing whispers of the Sultan's lost prison. He walked through markets and mosques, hearing fragments of old tales about tunnels and cries beneath the stones. At last he found a gate sealed with iron deep inside an abandoned cistern. He opened it, and the air that came out smelled of age and sorrow. He went down with a lantern and a notebook, counting every step. The deeper he went, the more the air pressed around him. His light trembled and shadows crawled along the walls. The silence was so complete that his own breath sounded like thunder. Then he heard a voice. It was soft like a sigh, saying, "Leave this place." But he kept walking. He reached a chamber filled with still water and saw his reflection looking back, yet the reflection smiled while he did not. Fear took his heart and he turned to leave, but the tunnel behind him was gone. The dungeon had closed again, claiming another name for its story. The historian never returned, and the cistern was sealed once more. The last descent became another beginning for the dungeon that never dies. The city above has changed. Towers of glass rise where minarets once ruled. The sound of traffic has replaced the call of guards. Yet beneath the streets, the dungeon remains untouched. It does not need doors or keys. It exists within memory itself. People speak of strange dreams of endless corridors and dripping water. Some wake with dust on their hands as if they had touched old stone. Scholars deny it, yet even they admit that no one truly knows what lies under the old palace. The Sultan's name has faded from history, but his fear still breathes in the dark. The dungeon was his confession, a monument built not for power but for guilt. Every empire leaves behind ruins, but only this one built a living shadow. Beneath Istanbul, the Sultan's dungeon still waits its silence, older than the city, older than time. When the wind moves through the Bosphorus at night, it carries a sound like a heartbeat. That is the voice of the past still whispering that power ends but silence remembers forever.